Okay, so welcome to another episode of the ITA Student Athlete Podcast. I have the pleasure today of being on a call with Taylor Ing, a Dartmouth alumni, a professional tour player, and also had stints in investment banking and is currently a software engineer. So, Taylor, please introduce yourself to the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Abby. Super happy to be here. I have made a couple twists and turns in my career, but had a fantastic 4 years at Dartmouth undergrad. Temporarily hung up the rackets for a couple years while I was working in New York, and then sometimes you just get that itch again. So I took a pivot and went back to playing on the pro tour, which was always a dream of mine and something I had thought about doing right after college, but for reasons I can explain later, I was excited for something new. But yeah, I was happy to get back into tennis and was playing on the tour for the last about 4.5 years. Amazing experience, really tough and challenging, but definitely was prepped well for it through the experience in college tennis, which was great. And I ended up having Dartmouth as my training base and the same coach that I had undergrad, which was phenomenal to have that kind of support system, which I know not all pro players have. But yeah, I recently stopped competing at the beginning of this year, and I'm in the middle of a pivot into software engineering. So it's been an adventure, that's for sure.
Yeah, most definitely. I mean, it's impressive to hear like your resume and everything that you've achieved, even just like looking you up online and reading all your accolades that you achieved at Dartmouth and then progressing from there. It was like incredible to see. But I'm going to just jump straight into, could you tell me a little bit more about what your college experience was like at Dartmouth? I understand it's an Ivy League, so obviously the academics are super strong, but you played tennis there to an extremely high level. So what was the lifestyle like there? How were you able to juggle academics with the tennis?
Yeah, that's a good question. It was definitely a concern of mine going in. I've always been very focused on my schooling, so that was always kind of the biggest priority for me. But obviously wanted to, play at a competitive school and be on a team that, we could really do well together. And I think that's exactly what happened. I was fortunate. The transition in my freshman year was pretty seamless. I had some fantastic teammates who were kind of helpful in guiding those early stages of, balancing rigorous academics. And especially at Dartmouth, we were on a quarter system. So it was kind of like a 10-week sprint every quarter rather than a semester school. So that was also an adjustment. But something that really helped was my coach, Bob Dallas, who is still the coach there now, fortunately for the program. He was a really big on, you know, the student and the athlete part of student athlete. And that certainly wasn't something I took for granted. You know, I think sometimes it's easy to feel like you need to put weight into one or the other, but he was always willing to work with us as a team to make sure we could kind of achieve those goals both on and off the court. And I think that really helped for me at least, and I know for a lot of my teammates, our performance in both. So I really felt like throughout my 4 years, I was able to kind of grow in all different aspects as a student athlete. Personally and as a player, going into college tennis, I actually didn't have too much of a junior tennis record. I had stopped playing the USTA tournaments for a period of time because I loved all different sports. So I played a bunch when I was younger. So I was a bit undertrained, and that was another great aspect of the 4 years that I really was able to evolve my game and start to understand myself as a player. So I couldn't have been happier with the 4 years I had there, and it really instilled some important values that have helped me in a lot of these kind of more significant career transitions I've made in the last 5, 6 years.
Amazing. Would you be able to talk a little bit more about like what values you learned there? Because I think that's like a massive part of college tennis is the growth you make, not just as an individual on the court, but off the court as well, and how it can set you up for life after. Um,
Yeah, totally. I think that's a great question. Something that I love and also don't love as much about tennis. I mean, it's an individual sport, right? But in college, you get that team aspect. And so I think a lot of the values we worked on as a team was, how do you push yourself as an individual, but also do that in the context of a team. So I think day to day, we were big on kind of the energy we brought to the process, and really, really focusing on kind of growth orientation. You don't become good at anything overnight, like whether it's academics or whether it's certain results that you want. And that was kind of the biggest thing that stood out to me early on about the coaching staff that we had. It was a very long-term values oriented organization, when it came to being a good teammate, making good line calls, not just to get ahead, which I know is tough in college tennis, but you know behaving with integrity, taking pride in your school, and understanding that you represent, not just yourself, not even just your team, but your school, whether you're at the school or, off doing an internship or anything like that. So values wise, it was a lot about honesty, integrity, process orientation, and just kind of doing the best that we could, not for ourselves, but for, the teammates that we had and what we were trying to accomplish together.
Very rightly said. Very rightly said. Always about honesty and integrity. I can 1,000% agree with that. One thing I've noticed about being like a student athlete, it's difficult to make time for stuff like internships or your academics. Was there always that open conversation with your teammates and your coaches of, hey, I might have to miss practice today, or I might not be able to play over the summer because I have an internship elsewhere? Because I know for a lot of us that went through the process, we didn't really have time for that. And there was always, for me, I'm speaking for myself here, I always prioritize the tennis.
Mhm.
So could you explain to me what that looked like for you? Were you able to have that open communication and dialogue with your teammates and coach?
Yeah, I was, and I felt really fortunate for that. Usually, before we selected classes and whatnot, we knew when our practice times were, and generally we're able to avoid those fairly easily because we would always practice in the afternoon, and the majority of the classes at Dartmouth were in the morning. So if there was a conflict, usually we would have an open discussion with our coaches, and it was pretty rare that like we had to choose tennis over that. And if it happened, the dialogue was very open, and usually we were able to kind of like come to a resolution, figure out maybe a different class slot that would work. But a lot of times, like especially for one-off things like, guest lectures that were coming to the school, really cool opportunities that like you wouldn't get that much, as long as it was communicated early with our teammates and coaching staff. Everyone was very respectful. We understood like we were there both for school and for sports. And as much as we could, we really tried to work around that and make both of them work.
Mm. And what did it look like? Because I noticed that you took some internships, is that correct? So how were you able to explain to your coach, like, I might not be able to play this summer or something, as many tournaments as you would like because I'm doing this, or how did it look like for you?
Yeah. So the biggest internship I did was going into senior year. And that ended up being the place I worked at after school as well. And that, yeah, I honestly was pretty out of shape after that summer, but it always happened, and we knew that. And that was never kind of something that was looked down upon. I think the normally in junior fall, again, we were on like the quarter trimester system. Junior fall was usually when a lot of the women on the team would take, foreign study programs or language study abroads, or, in various internships. And so they wouldn't even be there for that term. But that was a bit less consequential, especially back then, because, it was all individual at that time. And that was generally the most accepted internship period. But yeah, I think if we were in situations like that, we would try to come up with some semblance of a plan. Like, hey, even if you can just get to the gym once or twice a week, here's some stuff you can work on. But it was definitely an understanding like, hey, okay, we might fall behind a little bit, but those are opportunities that would serve us long after school. So it was great to feel supported in that regard.
Hmm. So would you say that during your time at Dartmouth, you've always been supported with what you've done academically and athletically? There was always that understanding there. And going into Dartmouth, was there an idea of what you wanted to do afterwards? And was there any inkling? Like, did they kind of give you advice in that aspect or?
Yeah, so I think I personally had zero clue what I wanted to study. I still have no idea what I want to do with my life, but I feel like that's a lot of people. So to be honest, at that time, it was kind of just looking up to the people a bit older than me and seeing what they were interested in. And speaking to it now, it was definitely a few years prior to the real kind of software boom. So a lot of my teammates were doing like sales and trading or investment banking, a lot of econ majors. So I kind of just followed in that track. I actually started as a math major, which was a huge mistake. That dissipated very quickly.
Yeah.
Yeah, not one of the best decisions there, Abby. But I ended up finding econ and I really, really liked that sort of applied math in a way. And so yeah, I think in in general, I always felt supported in those goals. And I think I did spend a bit of time on the other end of coaching, helping out with the team while I was playing on the tour, and I got to kind of see it from the other end. And I do really think, a lot of that question of how do you balance the academics and the athletics, knowing the type of people, at least that we got on the team at Dartmouth, when you let people explore those academic interests, I think it really does help the tennis. It's like all your eggs aren't in one basket on either end. And of course, when you feel like you're caught up and excelling in the classroom, I think it really does help your tennis as well. So I that was my experience. I think it's the experience of a lot of players that go through that program in particular. So I yeah, academically and athletically always felt very supported.
That's amazing to hear. I think it's pretty rare, I've heard from just a few friends, to feel supported in both areas. Especially being like a Division One athlete, there can be a very, very heavy emphasis on just the tennis side of it. But to be supported in both, I definitely agree. I think it translates. If you're supported in your academics and you're doing well, then when you go on the court, you can feel like less stressed and you want to play, and it's an outlet for you to get away from
Exactly.
one aspect of it. So I completely agree. I have a question though from the previous pod, and the question is, what are you going to look back on in 20 years in terms of college tennis? Like a high point or a low point?
Yeah. A high point that I'm gonna look back on, I would say, um, I'm gonna look back on those like seemingly insignificant moments that actually end up becoming the ones that stick with you. Like we had some really cool wins and whatnot, and they're amazing, and sharing those with each other is awesome. But I think what I'll remember is those practices where you're all a little bit tired maybe from school. So then you become really hyper and then you're doing a volley to volley and you're just being crazy and having so much fun. And I think that's what I'll remember. It's like that environment of doing what you love with other people that you care about. I think that's what I'm going to remember the most, and doing that with coaches who like really cared about us in a tennis center that was so special. Like I think it's really, again, I'm a lot about the experiences. So I think those small moments of like joy, and then of course, those moments where all the hard work you've put in, shows and results. But I think most of all, it's the small moments of, you know, enjoying tennis together. Yeah.
So another question I have is, how do you feel that college tennis and being at Dartmouth set you up for life after college?
Yeah, I think in a lot of ways, I think my immediate reaction to that question, and this is certainly something that is very special about Dartmouth in particular, but I think is pretty consistent across the board. I mean, we had a very strong alumni network, and being in the college tennis community and within the Dartmouth community really opened up so many doors and so many opportunities. And, you know, people understand what it's like to, and even if they haven't necessarily gone through it themselves, they know people who have, they get that rigor of, achieving excellence, like both in a classroom and in a sport or in any sort of, significant hobby or organization. And I think that certainly opened up a lot of doors for me, like the internship I got, various job opportunities I've had as well after school. I think the college tennis and that alumni network in particular has really, really helped. And then I think back to kind of one of the first things we were talking about, values wise, I think it has really set me up for a better understanding of kind of like what I'm looking for in terms of just organizations out there that value kind of all aspects of what you bring. And that's kind of how I felt in the program at Dartmouth. Was I was cared for as a person, I was cared for as an athlete, I was cared for just in general. And even when I graduated too, like that support system was there and was really strong. And while I might not know what I want to do in my life, I know what I'm looking for in kind of the people that I meet and the organizations that I'm a part of, as I, want kind of that well-rounded experience that I was able to get through college tennis in kind of all as many facets of my life as I can.
Nicely said. Nicely said. I like that. The alumni network, I've heard that as well from the people that like it's just such a massive benefit. Wherever you go, just to look into that and reach out and get connected in that aspect. I think it helps huge amounts. I had no idea when I graduated. There was like this whole period where I was like, yeah, I've got no idea what's the next steps and where to go from here. And by reaching out, I was able to kind of dissect that a little bit more and get a better understanding.
Yeah.
So, when you graduated, what did that look like for you? Were you a little bit lost, or were you thinking, okay, I know what I want to do, I have a better idea, or was it run me through that?
To be honest, it was a pretty smooth transition, but um it also helped, like I graduated and 6 days later started my job. So there really wasn't any time to even really think. And I was working in New York. So fortunately, like I had so many friends and teammates and that were there. So it felt like obviously a big change, but still a source of comfort knowing that I had those people around. And I had interned at the place I was going to. So that sort of stuff was familiar. But I think I definitely was lost in hindsight. It didn't feel like it at the time, but I was a bit lost on kind of what it would look like to have tennis in my life. So it just wasn't like at all. I touched a tennis racket 3 times in 2 years, I think, and twice for like a country club corporate event that, you
Mhm.
know, doesn't count. I think that in hindsight was where I was a little bit lost. I think I was really excited for something new. I mean, you get it after however many decades of, well, 2 decades of playing tennis your whole life. And it's almost like exciting to, hey, I don't want to work out or I don't want to, have to do this stuff. And that's fun for like a few weeks or maybe a month or two. But then I think that was part of the reason why I realized I really missed it, because I kind of made that a very clean cut, in a way where I kind of wish I had thought a bit more about how it could continue to be a part of my life. So I think that was actually more of the transition, but certainly finding community was important, and I actually found a lot of that through college tennis. Like my second year in New York, I was living with my teammate, Jacqueline, which was really fun. And we ended up like reaching out to some other women who we had competed against in our same conference. And like we got together and we hung out and it was so fun. Just, we all grow up. Like we all grow up. We have lives, beyond tennis. And it was kind of cool to experience that alongside the people we had competed against, because you respect what what you've all done, and you understand it in a way that other people maybe not can't as well. So I certainly think there was certainly some transition points, but a lot of the college tennis network really helped with that.
Hmm. So you had your internship, and then after you took your internship in your senior year, was there that like negotiation of I'm gonna have this like lined up for after I've graduated?
Yeah, I actually like signed my contract on the spot the last day of my internship. So that took a huge actually element of stress away for senior year. I was lucky not to have to, go through the corporate recruiting process again. And kind of was just able to enjoy the year, enjoy the time with the team, and take an okay class load. There were a couple hard classes in there, but senior year, I was trying to let the foot off the gas pedal a little bit. So yeah, I kind of negotiated that all before I started the fall semester of senior year, which was really nice.
And how did you get your internship, if you don't mind me asking?
Yeah. So actually, we can speak to alumni networks. I got the job because I got lost in New York City, which is a crazy story. So I was um, going for an interview with an investment bank, and anyone who knows me knows I have like the worst sense of direction. You could give me a map, you could give me every tool in the toolkit, and I'll still get lost. And I turned down the wrong street. And I had applied to this company called Evercore only because a friend told me to do it. They never recruited from Dartmouth, and I was like, "What's another application?" But they were notorious for very, very like intense technical interviewing. So I was like, "Okay, liberal arts, there's like no chance." And so I threw the resume in, and I walked down this street, and I had a Dartmouth bag on my shoulder, and someone yelled like "Go Big Green," and I was like, "What?" And I turned around, and it was just this guy getting into a taxi, and so struck up a conversation on the street, and it turned out he was like a senior partner at Evercore and used to um, work at Goldman and recruited a lot of Dartmouth people and Dartmouth athletes, and so he like was a huge fan of the school, so he ended up flagging my resume actually, and then I was able to go through the recruiting process with them, and I ended up getting an internship, which was insane. But I think that was one of the craziest like things that has happened to me, and I think was certainly a testament to just like the opportunities that like those college connections and connections of any sort open up. And it actually just happened that one of my other athlete friends, who was a basketball player at Dartmouth, ended up getting an opportunity at the same company through his connections as well. So I think all those things, and especially now with kind of what's happening in the job market, all those alumni connections are just so important. And you never know the people you meet, like the doors that can open. And so I think it's great to always try to just keep an open mind to
Mhm.
maybe to strangers that yell at you from the street, as long as they seem safe to approach.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, completely right. Completely right. Was there always in your mind that you were going to do an internship? Like, were you always wanting to do that?
I think so, really, just because it's what I saw everyone else doing, and it's not a great reason, but it was kind of just I didn't have so much of an idea of what I wanted to do. And, at that time, it was kind of a funnel of consulting and finance. And I just like wanted to go for it. And it was like a competitive outlet to try to just study for these crazy interviews. So I think I kind of had an idea. That's how I wanted to spend that summer going into senior year. And then as to what I would do after that, it was kind of like, oh, I got a job. I guess I'll go for it. But it ended up being an amazing company. So I feel very grateful for kind of everything that led to that.
No, that's amazing to hear that like it all worked out for you in that way. And I know you spoke there about when you finished, you hardly touched a tennis racket. Was that just because you were extremely busy? Did you suffer from a bit of burnout, or why was the reason behind that?
I think it was a combination. I was really ready by the end of college tennis to like just hang up the rackets. I had some kind of persistent shoulder issues that started at the end of my sophomore year. never anything like really diagnosed, but just, chronic,
Mhm.
rotator cuff stuff. And so I think I was just ready to not have that like rigor element in my life. And then I was really busy. So my hours were a bit crazy working. And I also just, I kind of wanted to throw everything I had into this job. I felt like I had a lot to prove because there was certainly an element of insecurity coming from like a not super finance background, and being a woman in business. I just felt like I wanted to give everything I had to that job, probably to a little bit of an extreme, in hindsight, but that seems to be a pattern for me. And so I just wanted to do a good job of that and really learn as much as I could. So I think it was a combination, yeah, of those two things you mentioned.
I just wanted to talk more about, so I think for me, like just from personal experience, like when I graduated, it was like a almost like an identity issue. Like I'd gone for so long out here being a student athlete, that's what I am, that's who I am, that's what I do. I work out, I play tennis, and then all of a sudden when that all went, I was kind of like, oh, like, what's next? How do I almost it became like a battle with myself as well to be like, okay, what still makes me happy? What can I still qualify as being good enough in a way? And how can I still be normal in that sense of like going out and being able to enjoy like time with my friends without having to think that like, oh, I haven't worked out today, so I really shouldn't be enjoying this. Do you know if that makes sense?
100%. It's funny because I felt like I have avoided that because of how quickly I went into the next thing, but I felt all those exact things when I stopped playing professionally. Like that is everything you said is spot on. It
Mhm.
was like it's been like a year-long process where I'm just like working through pretty much everything you mentioned. And I know from what you said is what a lot of like my teammates have said from their experience coming out of college. And I think I think that's just so common, and it's easy, especially coming from an individual sport, to almost think it's like, is there something wrong with me, or is it just me that's feeling like this?
Mhm.
And I think there's so much truth to it. And it's like with anything else, right? Like if you do something for that long, you can do as many exercises saying, I'm more than my sport, I'm more than this, and that's great, and you are. But it's so hard to internalize that, and it's a piece of you, and like it's a piece of you that's not necessarily completely lost, but it like has to be reformed. Like what where do you put that energy, where do you put that like kind of mindset? And I just like feel for so many athletes in that transition process. And I think it's good we're starting to see more institutions and stuff like what the Alumni Network's doing now with the mentorship program, which I think is phenomenal. We need more infrastructure, to support athletes in that transition. And I think the whole concept of identity is so important. And I think what I've tried to work on or just to think about is like, okay, what are those pieces of that athlete mindset? Because we're always athletes, like, right? You could hang up the rackets for the next 50 years and you're an athlete every single one of those days of those 50 years. It's just like where do we redirect that energy and what are those pieces that like sport formed within us that we can apply elsewhere, and then how do we find that community of people who are going through the exact same thing or who have gone through that exact same thing. So yeah, I think there's so much truth in what you said, and I think it's talked about more now, but certainly even like, well, what is it now, 8 years ago when I graduated, or I probably have that math off. Um, it's just, yeah, it never gets enough attention, and I think it's easy to overlook, but it's something that's so significant, to college athletes for sure. So any of those organizations, like the mentorship programs through C10, or just having networks through like your specific college's alums, I think are so helpful in transitioning.
Mhm. Mm. Okay, noted. Noted. I think that'll be very like helpful for people looking to go into that next step.
Yeah.
Um, so you kind of spoke and said that when you transitioned from college, you were all right because you started working straight away, right?
Yeah.
So did you ever have any like, I know you mentioned previously about playing a few times, but did you ever have any like second thoughts to it of like, man, I really miss it. I'm really struggling without playing. Or were you just so like buried into your work? I mean, you spoke about going at it for that period of time, that investment banking, and then you threw yourself into it. So was there ever like a second thought?
There wasn't a second thought until I had this weird idea to go back and play professionally. But those 3 times or whatever, when I did pick up the racket, something about it felt like a little painful. Like,
Mm,
you have that old idea of how your body can move and the things you used to be able to do. And like, I freaking love my backhand on the line. And I was spraying that thing to the fence like the first time I tried it after, I don't know, however many months. I was like, man, she wouldn't have missed that like a year ago.
yeah.
And I think it's so maybe those were more of like the second thoughts of, oh, then it would be like, oh, what's my life right now? So
Mm.
then I think I really did try to bury myself in my work, and maybe that was more of a coping mechanism in part. But I also really did like my job. So I think it was helpful to have that new intensity and that new challenge. And I think I really tried to channel everything into that. Um, but certainly, like now, as I'm thinking about, going into something new, I am trying to find a better balance of I want to keep the sport in my life and also dive into the next thing. And I don't think those things have to be mutually exclusive, like I kind of made them previously.
No, no. I think it's amazing. Hearing what you have to say and what you've gone into, like I think it's really, really impressive, like everything that you've done. And we spoke, well, you've mentioned it a bit there, but let's talk about you going on the pro tour. I mean, let's just talk about that because, some might say after you finish college, you've got a pretty good job afterwards. You said you love it. What made you want to take that risk? Well, a risk is some way of the word. That risk of being like, okay, I'm going to drop all this and I'm going to go and pursue a career playing professional tennis. And you said that even before you went to Dartmouth, it had never really been like you hadn't really worked for it. You know what I mean? It hadn't been a dream.
Yeah. Yeah. I had never really, I mean, I was never like, oh, I want to, like, I guess I thought, maybe once or twice, like, oh, I would want to play professional tennis. That would be cool. But just so I could be on the TV, um, and, uh, and get some sick sponsorships. But meaningfully, no, I had never really thought too much about it. But then when I got the idea, it like became a dream. Like I was like, wait, I'm 20. At that time, I was 23. Um, there's so much time, but there's also such limited time. And so I really hadn't had an inkling. And then it really was kind of just, I went to Boston to support as an alum, to support my school. So Dartmouth is playing, I think it was BU or something. And I was just going out to support them. I think it was January, February of 2019. And I was watching, and you're in that competitive environment. And I was like, man, I miss this. And I was like sitting there watching it with a friend, and I just joked. Like I just joked. I was like, haha, wouldn't it be so funny if I quit my job and like played pro tennis? And we were like, haha, it's so funny. And then I think it was like 3 a.m. I was at the office later that week, and I was like, oh, maybe I really should do this and so that was actually a scary thought. So I was like, I'm not gonna tell anyone. I'm just gonna maybe try to go to the gym now since I haven't gone in 6 months. And so I started working out again. And then I started playing a little bit more tennis. And then I finally like took myself seriously, and I was like, wait, like maybe I actually really do want to do this. Because at that point I kind of needed to communicate with the company. My contract was 2 years, so I needed to either sign for a third year or do something else. And I knew I never wanted to do the same thing at a different place because I liked the people I worked with too much. Um, so I was either gonna sign for another year or do something completely non-finance related. So I guess I did that. And yeah, I just once I started getting the idea, I knew I would wonder if I didn't go for it. And I'm very much about just life experiences and like just experiencing everything I can. And so I thought no matter what, it could crash and burn. Like I can just see how it goes and see what that life is like. And I'm so glad I did it. Yeah. Yeah.
Really? So, I mean, that's amazing to hear. So it started off as like a little thought and then it just escalated into something so much more than that. Explain to me what that was like for you, going like from being in a pretty secure job to then going after a dream. So explain to me that process, please.
Yeah, it was very difficult, honestly. I think it kind of intersects with a few of the different things we've talked about. But for one, I had there was a complete mismatch between what I thought my physical capability would be after that much time away from any form of physical activity, let alone tennis. So, um, first of all, it was exciting to sleep again because I just hadn't slept that much for basically 2 years of that job. But I liked I think, I liked something completely new, but something that was very hard. And maybe this goes along with a little bit of the identity thing or the role that tennis plays in our life. It was so different having tennis as a job versus an outlet. And I think that was one of the things that I struggled with the most for a very extended period of time, um, was finding the right balance for myself. You know, you could take every single aspect of your life. You can see it with Djokovic, for example, right? He says 23 out of 24 of the hours in his day are dedicated to his sport. And you can do that, right? Like you can control everything you eat, every workout you have, every recovery mechanism. And that was just too much, at least in the way I did that to start. And I felt so much pressure having made such a big change that I needed to commit like every part of myself to that. And I just pushed it way too much. And then I crashed and burned like very quickly, just realizing it wasn't a health, like great for my mental health. I really wasn't, I kind of did what I did with investment banking in the opposite way. I was pouring everything into tennis. I wasn't seeing too many friends. I wasn't doing other things I enjoyed. And that was a great lesson to learn. And that was one of the things I set out with for tennis was I wanted to see for sure how far I could take it. But something I had told a couple friends and I talked to my family about it was that I really felt like there were certain parts of myself that needed to grow. I didn't know what those were, but I felt like being in a tennis environment, especially alone and no longer having a college team, would force me to kind of face some of those things head on and really want to be. And so that was one of the biggest lessons early on was nothing can be your whole life. Like no job, nothing. It doesn't help in a kind of counterintuitive way, um, to put all your energy into one thing. So I think that was a very difficult transition for like 4 or 5 months. Um, but then gradually got a hang of things and then COVID hit. So that was a little bit of a wrench in things, but kind of gave me the chance to, you know, pursue other interests and then kind of reset on the tennis front. So yeah, it was definitely an adjustment.
Hmm. So after the 4 or 5 months, you had that, did you have to have like a chat with yourself in that aspect of, do I still really want to do this? Or, and what made you want to push on? You know, it sounded like it was pretty, like you said, a big transition. So what made you want to push through that?
Yeah, I think I actually talked with my I know there's like I was trying to think because there have been a couple of very clear inflection points through my tennis journey that really helped me to grow. And this was one of them. I think I was still very in touch with my college coach, Bob Dallas, and he was very helpful with that, kind of reminding me of those growth values that I mentioned early on. That you need the process orientation and you can't expect results to come overnight. And that's what I was expecting, which was so off. Like you wouldn't expect that even as a well-seasoned athlete, let alone like being undertrained. And so I think yeah, just kind of taking a step back and I was fortunate around that time. I hadn't gone up to Dartmouth as my training base yet. So I was at home with my family in New Jersey, training out of Philadelphia. And my family is amazing and they're super supportive. So to have them there kind of reminded me to take a look in the mirror and just remember who I am. And that I'm a lot more than just whatever I've currently chosen to do for work. I think that really helped me to reset and just figure out, okay, let's do some more things that bring me joy. And then it's going to help me to find the joy again in tennis.
So your college coach really played like a massive part in your journey then, from when you graduated to then playing on the tour. And while you were on the tour, how would you think that like aspects of being a college tennis player helped you with being out there and that transition?
Yeah, well, the thing that was great was running into other college tennis players on the road. Like that was the best thing. And you could tell right away who they were, even if you didn't know them, because they had good volleys. I'm like, yeah, you played college tennis. Like, I know you did. I don't know where you went, but you played college tennis. But it was that was actually kind of a source of camaraderie. Like I recircled with some friends I had from junior tennis who I played against in college or who I never did, but I source of support. Because we all knew that struggle of, going from having pretty much every resource available to you, right? At you know, no cost or covered under scholarship or just available at the school you've chosen to go to. And to then being completely on your own. And I think that played a huge role. And then, yeah, certainly having consistent contact with my coach in college and then teaming up with him for the last couple of years of my career made a huge difference. And just in general, I think there's so much, it's so helpful to have a college degree going into that because I mean, to know that that life's there for you waiting and to know that there are college connections that you get through tennis, like whenever you choose to stop doing that, I think that takes a tremendous amount of pressure off, especially when I've seen, particularly players from other countries or who haven't come over and like played in the States or had gotten a university degree. I think there's an extra degree of pressure um, on you. So yeah, I think it's a bunch of different things, but certainly college tennis helped me so much. And then it also made me miss it because you didn't get that aspect of, being lined up side by side, playing and cheering for your school. So I tried to channel that and just pretend that I was, you know, rocking the Dartmouth flag everywhere I went. So yeah, that was my attempt.
What would you say your takeaways have been from being on the tour?
Oof. There's so many directions we could go. I think first off, I have a tremendous amount of respect for anyone that does it for however long. It's brutal at times. Like it is just there's just so much you don't see and don't realize that you have to manage. And just the lifestyle and unpredictability. But that's a huge being able to make too many plans or commit to things because you don't know what, a month, 2 months, 3 months might like look like. You could have an amazing result this week, and that changes the trajectory of the tournaments you're going to go to. I think that, in addition to resources, is a huge learning curve. Just all the stress and things you need to manage off the court to even get on the court, especially if you end up traveling internationally, which so many players need to do starting out just to get points. Um, you know, you're like trying to stay safe in some countries, and then you're trying not to get sick from the food. You're fighting for practice courts where you might get like a 15-minute slot. You're eating meals trying to make friends with the same people you might play tomorrow. It is wild. Like it is so wild. But it's also such an adventure. Like I think that it's nearly I personally don't think anyone should go into it expecting like that it's going to be easy or that you're just going to like make a ton of money and it's all going to be like, you know, flowers and rainbows. Like it's a grind, and I think the commit to growth because wouldn't we all love to win every week? But that's just not the case, and I think that's so hard, especially for college players, when you go from being like the big fish in college tennis. You probably just come off of NCAAs, whatever, and then you go to like Africa and get beat by a 16-year-old or something. And so I think, you know, as much as you could, I think a big lesson for me was finding the joy in the adventure. Like just, you know what, I'm gonna get food poisoning in Mexico, but I'm gonna still play. Or like I'm gonna figure out like how to make friends and we're gonna commiserate over whatever. And those same friends I'll team up and play doubles with. We're gonna have a great week and like we're gonna go celebrate in between weeks. Like I think everyone takes a different approach, and I think there I totally respect that. Some people like for it all to be tennis. Some people do a ton of sightseeing. I just think it's none of what you see on TV, and in a way that's really special. That's been really special for me because I feel like there is so much you don't see that I now appreciate, and I think that is really why I have a lot of respect for anyone that has done it at any level and achieved anything. And by achieve I mean like showed up and played no matter how it went. So it was the best decision I've ever made. One of the best, at least.
So what after you decided to retire? Let's just say, by the way, that you achieved a career high ranking for singles of 290 and for doubles 283. That's pretty impressive.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Really impressive. But now that you've retired, what drove you into this next part of your life?
Yeah, so I never did any sort of computer science undergrad. Computers scared me. They still do. And but when I was working in New York, I really liked my job. I liked the people I worked with, but I kind of realized I wasn't really passionate about finance itself, but I loved Excel. So I was like, that nobody ever. Um, and so I really liked that kind of architecture and logical thinking. And one of my last projects at Evercore, I had to use a little bit of code for something I was building. And that was my first exposure to it. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. Didn't really think too much of it. But when COVID hit and I had all the time on my hands, I decided to start teaching myself like Python and SQL and a few of the more base, like more starting out comp sci languages. And I really liked it. And it came quite easily to me early on. I found it really fun. I found it like a game. And so I like did that really intensely again for like 3 or 4 months. And then, things returned to normal on tour. So didn't really think about it much. And then about a year ago, or now it's been more, in May of last year, I got hurt and I needed surgery. And so I then had a whole crisis of what I wanted to do with my life, because I really hadn't thought about what I wanted to do this after tennis, which in hindsight was very important. That maybe would be something I would have thought about a little bit more along the way. Um, and so I started researching a little bit about coding, and I realized it actually wasn't something I necessarily would need a master's for. They have these like coding boot camps and stuff now. And so when I realized that could be a pathway for me, I got back into coding. So I did like all this coursework in Python again, JavaScript, and web development. I like was building some websites and stuff. And so then I realized that was the route I wanted to go. But I returned to play and competed a bit more. But I knew that whenever I stopped competing, I would want to enroll in one of those boot camps and get more of a foundational like knowledge of programming, because I just like building things and I like the kind of technical work. So I literally just finished uh, coding boot camp. I did it from basically April to end of August, beginning of September. So that's where I am now. It's yet another big change, but still trying to play tennis as much as I can because unlike the other time, it wasn't a clean cut, and I still really enjoy playing. I still love playing with friends, and so I think it'll be more of a part of my life than it was last time I stopped.
Fair play, fair play. It's nice to hear that you're still like keeping it up and still playing. So you kind of got into that through an injury, and then you discovered that you liked Python and doing coding, and that originally stemmed from a love of Excel, which I've never heard before. But I saw as well that you're involved in a lot of initiatives and programs for student athletes. Is that right, or just like athletes?
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, for athletes in general.
about that, that'd be cool.
Yeah, so I got involved in a couple really cool organizations. The first was High Impact Athletes, an organization of athletes all around the world, a lot of like Olympians, professional athletes, and they basically encourage athletes to use their platform to support like evidence-based charities and to spread the word about that. So it's kind of rooted in the effective altruism movement. They have athletes who want to like pledge, percentage of their earnings to various portfolios they have in global poverty, like human welfare, like animal treatment, climate change, stuff like that. The True Athlete Project. So I found out about them through a newsletter from High Impact Athletes. They're based in the UK. They are starting to expand the US, but they're really their mission is to create a more compassionate world through sport, and they're rooted in a lot of mindfulness stuff. I'm involved in is their global mentoring program. So I'm a mentor alongside um, a bunch of other current and former professional athletes, several Olympians and Paralympians. So it's just a really, really cool organization. Everyone's really committed to, like, I go through workshops with the other mentors related to all different things like motivational interviewing, compassionate communication, identity and values, like all that. Been another really strong source of community for me. And a great kind of aspect to see how similar the athlete experience is, whatever sport you're coming from. And a portion of us all at the same time, like we're transitioning out of our sports. So I started that at the beginning of this year, and that's been critical in kind of easing that transition away from sport and kind of finding how I can still stay very involved in it, but maybe more from like a mentor perspective.
It would look like amazing to be a part of, especially that one that you speak about now, that's more UK
Yeah.
based. That was really, really cool to like read up on and see what they're trying to do. No, I think that's amazing. A really, really cool project. So how do you think college tennis has helped you navigate through these different chapters in your life?
Yeah, I think college tennis instilled a lot of discipline, like a lot of hard skills, in terms of just like time management, organization, all that stuff. It's provided community, like really strong community, all the way from, people that graduated 50 years ago that are still like involved in the network, and people that just graduated. I think there's this just constant understanding of what we've done and appreciation for it and respect for it. And I think people really want to help each other out. And I think, yeah, it's opened up a lot of doors for me. It's provided like a real foundation of support. And yeah, I think at the end of the day, it really prepared me well for all these pretty distinctive chapters that I've had, and it's been a constant throughout, whether it's, you know, the people that I met through there that support me in XYZ, um the connections that have, you know, helped me with various job stuff, etc. So I think in so many facets it's been helpful, and certainly to anyone that is like considering college tennis versus not, I'm a huge proponent of it. I think it prepares you so well for the real world and gives you that community of people who can really relate when that time comes to transition away from it.
Mm, most definitely. I completely agree with you there. Do you have a question for the next guest?
For the next guest,
Anything.
oh man. Um yeah, I should have thought about this more. Yeah, sure. So what's how about what surprised you most in your first year out of college tennis? That's open ended. That could be like career. That could be, you know, something about tennis specifically. Yeah. What surprised you the most?
I like that. That's a really good question. That's a
I
good
don't know where I pulled that one.
one. In terms of like being a student athlete and being a college tennis player, that I feel like there's a certain mindset that goes alongside of that. Like, how do you feel like that translates into life after college?
Discipline. I really think it's discipline. Like whether you're at a school where it was all tennis or all like or very heavily academics, like regardless, it's that discipline of getting up, getting your workout done, like being in a team, pushing yourself as much as you can to be a good teammate. I think it's so easy to overlook that, because we are just used to the discipline of this is my practice time. I have 3 or 4 hours of training, which means I have XYZ number of hours to get my schoolwork done and extracurriculars. I think that that is like so underrated, and something that a lot of employers appreciate about athletes that they have that discipline. So I think, yeah, that's the biggest thing that stands out to me: discipline, resilience, um, and yeah, just competitiveness. And that goes so far. Like just being competitive with yourself, like expecting the best out of yourself. I think those things, yeah, all come from sports across the board, and I think are just so useful in like any job after.
You were amazing to have on, and thank you so much for coming on and sharing about your experiences. That was really insightful into what your life was like and your transition period. So I really appreciate it.
Oh, absolutely. I appreciate you having me on. It was super fun to chat, and I love what you guys are doing with the pod and as an organization, the alumni network and ITA I think is doing so much great work for athletes. So I was more than happy to be on. I appreciate it.